Hello, I just want to make a quick video about some of the things Sargon of Akkad has been saying recently, or Carl Benjamin. Basically, he has done this series of videos where essentially England is failing and he doesn't really understand why, and he's really frustrated with the way the politicians have decided to handle it. So I do think he's missing a few things. I just want to explain these things and not necessarily correct him or offer him a solution, but just maybe explain to him why these things are happening and maybe one or two things he might have missed that would just kind of make his worldview click and make sense. Basically, he's upset that England is changing. It's not going to be the same for him as it was for his grandparents, and it's not going to be the same for his grandkids as it was for him. He recently did a video about birth rates. Basically, no one in England is having kids, and he doesn't understand why. He refers to it as a black hole where bloodlines go to die, and he points out very astutely that this is actually even happening to the immigrants. So there's this narrative that immigrants are have very high birth rates, and that's one of the things that's going to bolster England's population growth into the future. And that's not true. They also have below, on average, the immigrants to England also have below replacement fertility rates. So Carl Benjamin doesn't really understand why we're doing it, why we're bringing all these people into England. And I don't think he understands the larger plan. The larger plan is, yes, these immigrants might not have kids at replacement rate, but you can always bring in more immigrants. That's the beauty of immigration. You can always bring in more. And that's going to be the plan into the future. And that's why no matter who you vote for, you're going to get more immigrants. And that might not be the answer Carl Benjamin wants to hear, or he might not like that, but that kind of solves that piece of the puzzle. He doesn't understand why the country is doing this. Now, to the much larger question, why is this happening? Why is England, after all of these centuries and millennia even, has England become a place where bloodlines go to die? And it's very simple. As a government increases in size, basically it has to take resources from the productive economy. And there's two reasons for this really. One's macro, one's micro. But the macro version is that the government is taking resources from the productive economy and using it for itself. So in England's case, they have all kinds of government regulations, all kinds of taxes, all kinds of benefits they pay out. And it's very difficult to have a family if you constantly see your cost of living increase and your wages stay stagnant. And in general, whenever a government becomes about 70% of the economy, population growth stops, and you actually go into negative. Economic growth stops, population growth grinds to zero, even negative, and it's essentially when a society begins to collapse, because it's only there for a little bit, but then as the systems degrade over time, you don't have the growth needed to replace these systems or these people. So that's kind of where Britain has been for a long time. They have a very generous welfare state and a very obtrusive regulatory state. And together, I mean, it depends on how you count this, but like, Carl Benjamin was saying how, something like over 50% of people in England receive benefits from the social safety net. And I bet it's even higher than that if you count people who are receiving maybe partial payments or people whose jobs are in the government. Because if you think the government itself is not a productive sector, it just it imposes rules but doesn't produce anything. It takes from the productive sector and then imposes rules. Whether you think those rules are good or bad is beside the point. The government itself does not produce anything. So if you include government workers, if you include companies who receive significant regulatory benefits or subsidies, if you consider what percent of their revenue generation is due to government rules, and then you look at the percent of employment, I bet you're going to have a much higher percent of England's workforce, depending on the current government system as it is, as it is written. In the United States, it's just over 50%. If you look at people who receive social benefits, if you look at companies who receive grants from the United States, and that's their main source of revenue, if you look at their employees, if you look at Social Security, all those things, over 50% receive their income from the government. And so once you hit this point, it's very difficult in any democracy to turn around. It's pretty much impossible, because any change to the government will rally people to the government's defense. And you essentially have a majority of people voting for higher wages, and the only way the government can make those higher wages is by increasing benefits, which of course takes more and more from the productive economy. So the larger the government you get, the lower your population growth is going to be. This is just a statistical truth. There's this great chart, I wish I could bring it up, maybe I can post it somewhere and you can see as well, that you look at the price of gold versus fertility rates, and fertility rates just drop as the price of gold increases. It's really incredible. It's a very strong correlation, extremely strong correlation. And it's not that the price of gold has anything to do with fertility rates, it's that the government is printing money. And this is one way that governments spend beyond their means. So if they have already maxed out the number of taxes they can take out on people, the next step is essentially to print money by various forms. You can do, perpetual bonds. You can do all kinds of things that are, a very complex way of just printing money. So as there's more money in the money supply, the price of gold goes up because gold doesn't change. It's just a direct mirror of the money system. And so as you get more money, the price of gold goes up and fertility rates drop. And what you're essentially seeing is more and more resources being transferred to the government sector or to people who depend on the government sector. And I really want Sargon to think about how an individual family, he's a family man, how an individual family man experiences this, just in their personal lives. What they see is that if you have an economy with essentially zero economic growth, or he said, England has 1% economic growth this last year, which honestly, I think all of these statistics are basically lies. The government, wants it to look like there's really high economic growth, so they jerry-rig all of the systems just to make it look as good as possible. I think if you took a true accounting of the economic system, it would look much, much worse. So I think if you, for example, took out all government employees, you'd probably have negative employment or negative GDP. And the reason you would take out government employees is because specifically they don't produce anything. They are not there to create. They are not there to make anything or improve people's lives necessarily. They are there to enforce certain rules or make more rules. So you might think those rules are necessary. That's beside the point. You might think that it is important to have a small, government sector just to have rules everyone can play by. But when that small sector gets too big, essentially it starts leaching from the productive sector. And if you think about this from a family man's perspective, what you see is every year the cost of living goes up, and your wages might go up, but not as much. And so if you have a kid, let's say you go from husband and wife to husband, wife, and child. A child's not going to increase your expenses by half, but they might increase your expenses by 20%. And so you have to take a significant cut in your standard of living that you're essentially never going to make back if you have inflation in your economy. It's a permanent cut in standard of living. It's very difficult for people to do. So if you live in a house that's like a 1-1 or a 2-1 or something, and you have a kid, all of a sudden you have to upgrade houses, which is not really that realistic for people who are just living paycheck to paycheck. Additionally, if you have 2 kids or 3 kids, all of a sudden 20, 40, 60% more expenses. That's way more expensive. That's a huge cut in the standard of living that you're asking people to take, and most people don't feel ready to make those changes. If you live somewhere where it's a driving culture, it means maybe giving up your car and riding the bus. That's a huge ask, and just not really that many people are going to do it. And if you look at this conversely, in an economy that has a lot of economic growth, what you find is that let's take a wild example, right? Let's say economic growth is 5% a year, which is really, well, let's say 3% a year, because that's a little bit more realistic. It's very competitive, but it is possible. So if your economic growth is at 3% a year, let's say year 1 you find out you're having a kid, right? That's the year you find out. So your wages increase 3%. And then, of course, your standard of living drops 20% when you have the kid later that year, but you're only really down 17%. And not only that, but in about 6 years, you're back up at your normal standard of living. So it is very possible for someone to say, well, having a kid is a cut to my standard of living, but there is an endpoint. I will, 5 years from now, we'll be back, we'll be living, in a great house, and we'll have a great car, and we'll be able to go on our same vacations. All of the things we enjoy now, we will enjoy again when they're, 4 or 5 years old. And the thing about this is that it actually underestimates how good things are, because in a growing economy, people naturally get raises and also get promotions. So as you age, most people over 5 years can either find a job that pays more, or they can ask for a promotion within their normal job. So if you think, average promotion over 5 years is what, maybe let's just take something conservative and say 10%. all of a sudden, your first year, the economy grows 3%. Second year, economy goes 3%. That means you're only down 14% by the time your child reaches their first birthday. If at that point, if within those 2 years, you get a 10% raise, all of a sudden you're only down 4%. And within 3 years, after finding out you have a kid, you're back up to your normal standard of living. And as you raise a kid, this happens anyways. You're gonna lose sleep, you're gonna lose time. You're already planning to maybe cut vacations anyways. So around the time when they grow up a little bit, all of a sudden you're back to your old standard of living. And it's much easier to justify having 2, 3, 4 kids if you see the economy growing and you experience the economy growing for a very long period of time. So basically what England has to do to get on board, and this is the only solution they've ever found, and this has happened with many different countries, like Sweden, for example. If you include their taxes and regulation, they hit the 70% mark a while ago, and since the 90s they've been looking for ways to liberalize their economy without destroying what it means to be Swedish or giving up the values they hold dear. So this has happened many times before. And essentially the only solution that England has is to massively cut the welfare state and to massively cut regulations. If they can cut government by 80%, you would have unbelievable economic growth. Just like Carl Benjamin cannot imagine the opportunities that will be available to him and his coworkers or him and his community. And on top of that, people will voluntarily have kids. Without doing this, just Carl Benjamin asking people to have kids for the good of England is almost like asking people to stop eating meat because that might someday have an effect on global warming or the environment. It's just not really persuasive to most people. It's a tragedy of the commons problem. Most people are not going to make gigantic personal sacrifices to maybe have some ambiguous benefit to other people at some point in the distant future. It's just not a realistic. It's just not persuasive to most people. Luckily, Carl Benjamin agrees with some of these. He has mentioned that the welfare state has to be cut. I don't think he understands how far it has to be cut. You could cut that welfare state from 50% of people who are on it now to 5%. And no one would go hungry. Most people that's a larger discussion. If England decided to cut government by 80%, things would be fine. Things would be fine, the economy would be booming, the English people would have many kids. And I want to point this out. Carl Benjamin talks so much about culture, and the immigrants have a different culture, and he wants his kids to live in England that he grew up in or his grandparents grew up in. He just wants to pass it down like it's been done so many times before. What he kind of understands, but maybe not, is that you know that this isn't a cultural issue because the immigrants also have negative replacement rates. And so whatever is going on in the culture is completely different than what the government has going in the very real costs and benefits people pay for the government versus having kids. And I'm kind of repeating myself at this point. I think that's pretty much everything. That basically, because England has chosen a very big government path to go down, all taxes end up being taxes on production, which eventually become a taxes on the production of children. It's just always how it works out. And so since England decided to go in a high tax, high regulation road a long time ago, we are finally feeling the full force of that. And it's just going to continue the longer this happens. So England needs to cut the government, and that's really the only solution, and everything will be fine. As far as immigrants, Carl Benjamin might not want to hear this, but the government knows this. It's not like I'm saying anything that the government doesn't know. They have experts, all kinds of experts on staff. They understand that their population growth is irreparably damaged, and that's why they're bringing so many immigrants in, because they don't see England as able to maintain the population under the current system, and they don't see it as politically possible to cut 90% of the welfare state. They think there'll be revolts, there will be civil war. It's better to, you just need to find a different solution. And you might not like the solution you have, which is bringing in millions of immigrants to eventually replace the English people, but the only alternative is a very brutal and bloody civil war as people defend their benefits against government cuts. So that's kind of the catch-22 that the English government is in right now. They want to bring in immigrants to shore up basically the shortcomings of their own population growth problem. So you bring in immigrants right now. The reason that works so well is because basically you can ship in a 25-year-old male, but if you have a little baby boy right now, it's going to take 25 years of investment before he can become productive. And on top of that, you need a certain number of people to maintain English infrastructure, just the roads, the wireways, stuff like that. If you're not having enough people, you might not have enough labor to do those necessary jobs. On top of that, having such a generous welfare system means that young English people who would normally have done those jobs, there's a huge incentive, there's a huge magnet out of the labor force. Again, I would like Carl Benjamin to look into this himself for England, but the majority of Americans who are on disability don't have a disability that third parties can identify. So if you go and you say you're super depressed, or my back hurts, and then they do an MRI and it turns out your bones all look fine, that doesn't mean you don't have a muscular problem and that your back muscles aren't spasming. They can't necessarily see that. So there's a lot of people on disability, actually most people, who don't have something that you can independently verify with a machine or by looking or by testing. And some number of that is fraud. So I would ask Carl Benjamin to make his own guess on how much of the welfare system is going to just pure fraud. But a young person who can skim 85% of their needs from the government isn't going to go work 40 hours a week to get the other 15%. It's just that simple. It's just how it's breaking down. The English government knows this. That's why they're importing people. And the plan is that yes, these people also don't have children at replacement rate, but you can always just bring in more people. This is a long-term plan. If Carl Benjamin tries to kick out all of the immigrants without making these fixes first, what he's going to see is a massive economic depression that would essentially make the Great Depression in the United States look like child's play. And that's what they're trying. That's also what the politicians are trying to avoid. Just massive economic dislocation. So the solution to this is to cut the government by 80%. Carl Benjamin believes many of the immigrants are here to scam money off the government. If that's true, they will leave because they can no longer do the scamming. So it's a win-win for everyone, except for the people who are currently receiving benefits. And there needs to be a real conversation about hey, our society is imploding. Our civilization won't be here in 50 years if we continue down this path. People sacrificed for World War I, people sacrificed for World War II. It's time for this generation to sacrifice. You're gonna have to cut your pensions, you're gonna have to cut your safety net, you're gonna have to cut the regulations. There's all kinds of government pseudo-monopolies in Europe. I'm not as familiar in Britain specifically, but basically every modern government has such a large regulatory net that essentially gives various companies either legal protections or a monopoly or a pseudo-monopoly. So I'm confident that that's also the case in England, and all of that needs to go. Go and read The Wealth of Nations. It was written, no one wrote a 900-page book back then just because they felt like it. The Corn Laws were absolutely strangling the English economy and keeping England from succeeding as it should. There are all kinds of regulations and taxes and all kinds of stipulations on who could do what, when, where. And The Wealth of Nations was a response to that, hey, we should get rid of this. Keep in mind, capitalism has never been popular among the people, not once in any society. What happens is that the elites are convinced that capitalism works, and they impose capitalism on society, and everything gets great. And people stop complaining because society gets so much better, so much faster. So basically, that's the only solution, and it's either adopt radical capitalist reforms, or just continue England within our lifetimes is going to be turned into South Korea and their replacement rate, or turn into Japan. And those countries with very low population growth, those civilizations might collapse, and that's just the long and short of it. So every civilization deserves to survive and thrive, and England's no exception. So do the right thing. You gotta give up your social security, you gotta give up your welfare benefits for England.